All right. So we're going to hit each of these themes. And the first one is the covenant. So I'd love to hear for you guys, when you think about the foundation of your marriage, what your understanding is of the way that God built this. What's been the most helpful thing for you guys, or one of the helpful things about keeping your marriage covenant kind of at the foundation of your relationship?
Yeah, it's a really interesting reality for us specifically. So I don't know how much everybody gets into the personality types and different things, but we are not supposed to exist together in any right. Which I think in some sense has been a blessing for us in that we never really were tempted to depend on fleeting feelings or just like perfect, beautiful, romantic picturesque love for one another that just comes naturally and you don't have to work out. We tend to have a fairly conflictual relationship in a lot of ways. But again, even early on as we were dating, what that I think caused, and again, I'm very logical.
Not all feeling.
You will, if you know Ange, you will know exactly what she's feeling and experiencing at any point in time, and you'll never know from me.
Still trying to figure that out.
So, instead of kind of looking at that as a really difficult reality, though it has been, and we'd be glad to share all the nitty gritty of that. I think what the Lord began to show us over the years and what we learned together was that we couldn't depend on just feelings to have a healthy relationship. We had to fight for something bigger. So then you start to ask, well, if it's not that, if it's not what Hollywood presents or even what books or stories present, it's not this like always this honeymoon vibe, then speaking of which, our honeymoon, we realized this really on our honeymoon when we spent 11 days on a 7-mile island. I think we're as close to divorce as we've ever been. But we kind of recognize that it takes a choice, not a feeling. And so I can remember we began to develop some of that language, and feel free to jump in at any point, but you were struggling, Andrew was struggling with, just some identity issues with like, man, who am I as a mother? I was on this career path. Where's my value? There's a lot of stuff that I think is pretty normal and common to kind of like deal with and work through as a mother of many kids. And I got this word from the Lord just to say to her, like, and she asked me this question. So this will get somewhere. She said, "Why did you marry me?" And what she was looking for, again, I'm telling your story. Maybe like what I over time realized she was looking for was me to tell her the things that I liked about her. And I drew I don't know if this is good marriage advice or not, but I just felt like the Lord impressed upon me very clearly in that season, in that moment, kind of like, don't give in to this. Don't give in to the temptation to just abundantly tell her things that make you like being with her or like her. And instead let the foundation, the future of your marriage be. And I kind of looked her in the face and I said, it's not about things that you are. I chose you. I'm choosing you, and I will always choose you. And this kind of past, present, and future reality that, I think God was leading us in that. And since then, that was probably about 10 years ago. Yeah. Since then, and we're 20 years into marriage now, I feel like that's been a very mutual kind of perspective we've been growing in.
Yeah, I feel like we each have moments or have had moments where we've had to come back to that on both sides. And like Britt was alluding to with our personalities, thankfully, we agree on pretty much all of the big things, like the what and the why. We usually are only disagreeing on the how. So I think that that's really helpful. And so our hearts are for the same things. We're about going after the same things. We just kind of get locked up in the communication of how we're going to go about it. And so for me, in that season that he was specifically talking about, it was like, that was a reason where I was just feeling a lack in life, right? In kind of like he said, my identity at that time of like, what am I doing? Why am I doing it? I need some affirmation to kind of help point me in the right direction. I felt like at that time, like the husband's supposed to love as Jesus loved the church. And I felt like it took me some time emotionally because I'm like, I want this right now. I want my ego to be stroked right now because I kind of need that. So it took me, a good day or two to come around and go, oh, I actually think that is the better way because that is what God says, right? Like it's not about what we do that we're chosen. It is about just being His, And what was crazy, I mean, we all have these moments where what was going on in my heart between us was actually what was going on, vertically, my heart with the Lord. And so when I was able to wrap my mind around like, oh, Red is choosing me, He has chosen me, He will continue to choose me, it was actually what I needed to hear about God in that moment too, right? Like He chose me. I haven't done anything where He's going to be like, I'm kicking you off my team. I'm not satisfied with you anymore. But because it wasn't about my action, it was about His heart. So yeah, we've had to kind of come to those moments a couple of different times in our marriage. I remember early on, there was a season of life where maybe there were a little more romantic feelings early on leading up to our wedding. But I remember us also having a really impactful moment going, okay, let's take the next 3 days. And I don't even think we saw each other. And we just sat and decided this has to be a decision. Like, let's take our hearts off the table and let's make a decision about, am I ready to step into this covenant? Because it's forever. And I think that was super valuable for us. That's something that we try to speak about with our kids all the time as we're starting to have, romantic conversations with them in their own lives.
That's so good. Yeah, there's a few things that really stirs up for me. One is that if it's about the things, then that just makes your spouse endlessly in competition with everyone else because, oh my gosh, they have more of that thing that, my husband or my wife likes about me than I do. Like, what is that? All of a sudden, what just happened to our relationship makes everyone else a threat, unless they're weaker or in every area. It's like, that's not good. And I really love, the idea that, and that to not say just I chose you, but I'm choosing you, I will choose you, like that this is rooted in a decision made in the past, but it is being constantly redecided. And it's not that I'm going to decide differently, but it's that I'm going to constantly reaffirm that decision in the present. And I will continue to reaffirm that decision in the future. There's a phrase that for me has, and it, again, these things for a lot of people, they don't sound romantic. And I think the thing that's so dangerous about the culture of romance is that if you really study it, it is transitory. And that's what makes it difficult. That when these two things come in collision, the covenant has to be the foundation. The romance can't be the foundation. Romance is so important that we find ways to stir that up and that we're constant. But there could be moments, whole seasons where that's a problem. And so if you don't have that foundation, this is why marriages just spectacularly fail. And so I always I think about it, again, it doesn't sound romantic, but I'm like, that's the deal we made. I made a deal with you, I've said this to April before. I made a deal. Like, I'm going to stay with you for life. I will be faithful to you for life. And that's a deal that I made, that I'm making, that I will always make. But, you can rest in this relationship, completely rest that I will stay committed to you because it's a decision at the end of the day that we made. And that decision had terms, it had elements to it, and I am going to keep my side of that deal we made. And man, it's a beautiful deal that allows then for romance to be, apart and to come and go, and that you can focus on that and grow that. But man, yeah, I think that's such a critical and I think incredibly countercultural message.
Yeah, I think it allows for acceptance, right? Like I had to accept the reality that, and like we know this at a logical level, but at a deep heart level of I'm not perfect. I'm not going to be the perfect person that He would, draw maybe on board. And also accepting He's not perfect for me. Like in that way, like we're just not going to perfectly meet each other's needs or desires all the time, right? We felt like 2 years ago, so at year 18, I guess, that was probably our worst year of marriage ever. And it wasn't because like we had trauma and difficulties in our family. There was none of that, at that time. It was just like a lot of the romantic feelings were gone, and we were just like, well, we're still doing this thing. And like being able to come back to, okay, I'm trusting this. We agreed to this. We said this. This is where we stand. And then what was really amazing is after we worked through that, last year was our best year of marriage.
That's
Yeah.
so cool.
Yeah. There's something, I mean, you said it, Jeremy, it's about ordering, right? What's the foundation? What are you building on? Whether it's a marriage or a business partnership or friendship or relationships in general, I think come down to what is your foundation that's going to be so significant to how much you can build on it. And that analogy might be cliche at this point, but it's because it's true.
Yeah, there's something down there at the foundation, and when everything breaks, you land on it, and you're like, "I hope it's really, really solid." And what people are doing is they're building their marriages on very flimsy foundations, and it works great when everything's you're living upstairs, but once you fall through and hit the basement, if your basement is fragile, man, you're in trouble.